In this video I want to discuss the question of the employer's obligation under the Employment Equality Act to make reasonable accommodation for an employee with a disability. The employer does have an obligation, and that's what I'm going to discuss in this video. My name is Terry Gorry, I'm a solicitor. I make videos about Irish law, employment, small business, entrepreneurship and all that sort of thing. Employers are obliged, as I said, pursuant to Section 16 of the Employment Equality Act 1998, to make reasonable accommodation for an employee who has a disability. In this particular case involving the WRC, it's a recent decision involving a school teacher. It's a small primary school. The teacher had been out sick and was returning to work to the small primary school on a phased basis. One of the conditions around her return to work in the school was that in order to reduce the risk of infections, she'd only work with small groups of children and avoid mainstream class settings. Certain conditions had been agreed by the principal in recognition of the obligation by the employer to provide reasonable accommodation for an employee with a disability or an underlying condition. However, one day, as these things happen, the principal was under pressure because two staff members had failed to show up, were absent rather, and the principal asked the teacher in question if she'd assist her with one of the mainstream classes. The teacher refused, as she'd been advised not to work in a mainstream setting. The principal told the teacher that it was an emergency and asked for an assurance that if the situation occurred again, that the teacher would assist her. The teacher then went out on work-related stress and requested on her return that she only teach in a learning support capacity and would not be requested to work with mainstream or help with mainstream classes. The school did not agree to this request because it would have been difficult for them to do so. Small primary school, it would compromise the health and safety of the children in the school according to the Board of Management. The teacher brought a claim to the WRC, the Workplace Relations Commission, on the grounds of discrimination by reason of the school's stance with respect to the teacher's request. The WRC adjudication officer held that it would be a disproportionate burden for a small school to allow the teacher to work full-time in a special education or learning support capacity. The school, in other words, successfully defended the claim. This case is a good reminder for employers that whilst they do have an obligation to make reasonable accommodation for an employee with a disability, the burden that they're asked to carry must not be disproportionate, because Section 16 of the Employment Equality Act says that the employer shall take appropriate measures where needed in a particular case to enable a person who has a disability to have access to employment, to participate or advance in employment, or to undergo training, unless the measures would impose a disproportionate burden on the employer. The WRC held in this case that the measures being requested by the teacher not to assist or work in a mainstream class would have placed a disproportionate burden on the employer, and the employee, the teacher, lost her case. It's a good illustration, a good example, as it were, of the balance to be struck between a burden or obligation on the one hand and a disproportionate burden on the other hand. Hope you find this video useful. If you do, I would appreciate if you gave it the thumbs up down below, and you may be interested in subscribing to my YouTube channel. Thanks a lot.